Thank you so much to everyone for taking the time to join us today. Before we get right into it, I did want to spend a minute setting the context and taking you through Zinnov's journey with respect to returnship programs. Why we came to work in this space and what we hope for today's webinar to address. While we have been working in the space of inclusion and diversity for around 4 years now, returnship programs as a concept are not new and they've been around for over a decade. It was definitely looked at as a much smaller subset of a much larger goal and never kind of included our offerings, and our offerings never really coincided with that space. And then, of course, the pandemic happened and it had considerable effect on inclusion and diversity, as well as talent priorities, much like other key areas of business and the workplace. And with everything we were seeing around employee empowerment, the Great Resignation, the shift in the mix of available talent pool in India, and we realized that there was definitely a huge untapped potential to make returnship programs a sustainable, innovative, and consistent component of an organization's talent acquisition strategy. To not only hire talent who is diverse, but also who are uniquely skilled, highly motivated, and unwaveringly loyal. So in that context, we dedicated a significant part of 2021 to unlearn and relearn the current industry landscape, appetite, challenges, as well as priorities for returnship programs, so that we could support our clients in launching these programs in the best possible way. In that context, in today's webinar, we do want to touch upon the efficacy of current returnship programs. We want to question whether they're really shifting the needle as much as they can and as much as they should. And then I'll be handing it over to a panel of experts with varying levels of maturity in the space to highlight their experiences and challenges and learnings on returnship. And most importantly, also talk about how we can ensure that we set up our returnship programs for success. That being said, I do want to call out that this topic is multifaceted. It has cultural and societal influencers. It is constantly evolving with no one right answer for any of the aspects that I highlighted. So I will not attempt to portray that we have that answer, especially since I only have 15 or 20 minutes to work with. But rather, I'd like to use my time to arm you with some of the information that we have collected over the last year, and to also seed some thoughts in your mind to elevate the conversation that will follow. Throughout the course of the webinar, we will be having a couple of poll questions that will pop up for you to answer and share your thoughts, and we look forward to your participation. Over the course of the last year, we have interacted with all stakeholders involved in returnship programs. We've been able to speak to over 25 organizations who have been involved with the returnship programs at various levels of maturity, including those who were able to successfully pivot during the pandemic and continue their returnship programs virtually. We also surveyed and engaged with over 700 women across India who identify as returnees themselves, across an age group from 25 to 50 plus years, as well as career break of as low as 1 to as high as 10 years. Most of the insights that I will share today have been a culmination of these interactions and conversations with these various stakeholders, supported by secondary research on the historical evolution of returnship programs. So to begin, I just want to touch upon the growth of returnship programs in India and figure out when they were introduced and how they've evolved so far. As most of us now know, Goldman Sachs was the first ever organization to launch a returnship program back in 2008, which introduced the concept to the world and of course to India as well. Without getting into too much detail, just a little bit of an illustration as to how the concept gained popularity and grew really quickly across India Inc. ever since then. Right? And the size of the circles that you see here are indicative of the various headcounts of organizations that adopted returnship. And the colors kind of indicate the expansion across industries, also including tech industries, also including different kinds of roles and flexibility for eligibility criteria for these women. And as it stands today, our research showcases that around 30% of organizations in India, which comes up to a number of around 380, specifically for Global Centers of Excellence, GCOEs, have some form of returnship programs at their site, which delegates and showcases an exponential growth in adoption over the last 12 years. Now, the impact of returnship programs can, of course, be measured across multiple parameters, both direct and indirect outcomes. And that being said, the most obvious metric for success at an industry level would technically be the amount of women that these programs have been able to successfully reintegrate into the workforce in India. Right? So in an attempt to kind of get that data, we began with comparing the female labor force participation rate for India in the same period of time the returnship programs have grown. And the data looks something like this. Right? If we look at historical data till date across most countries, women's participation in the labor force has increased. Right? So the global average is 47%. And specifically for developed nations, it's around 55 to 65%. And this is World Bank data as well as that from the Labour Organization. And if we compare that to India, we see that in contrast, India's labour force participation rates have nearly halved in the same period, from 2008 to 2021. And it's significantly lower than that of other developing nations of similar construct, like Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, which have in comparison witnessed really high economic growth rates, and improvement in their human development indicators. More women have joined the workforce, and that's really subsequently changed their societal construct. And in fact, according to the Center for Talent Innovation, I think some 31%, or probably even higher now, of highly qualified women in India have voluntarily left their jobs. And while about 9 out of 10 of those women who have left their jobs said that they wanted to resume their careers, only 40% of them found full-time and mainstream work. Okay? And when we study the talent landscape of women employees in India in the last year, our research showed that around 100,000 women have left the workforce in the last 5 years alone. And if we narrow that number down further just to India GCOEs, or global centers of excellence, right, it comes to around 25,000, which is 25%. And specifically for engineering talent pool, the data stands at around 10,000 women. And out of this entire 100,000 women pool that we're looking at, as per our research, only 2% of them have been successfully reintegrated into the workforce through returnship programs. That's the gap that we're looking at. Right? So needless to say, that is a huge gap that needs to be filled when it comes to women seeking returnship opportunities, despite the exponential increase in the number of organizations, and GCOE specifically, who are launching returnship programs in India. So that certainly merits an exploration into the cause of this. And while it may be impossible to pinpoint into one specific reason, we did notice some sort of a trend during our conversations in the last year. I want to take you through some of those thoughts today. And I'm sure that most of you are familiar with the iceberg theory, principle, model, whatever you want to call it. But for those of you who may not be, it was initially introduced by Ernest Hemingway as a literary device that suggests that there's always more to a story than what the reader or the viewer sees. And it's since then, as a concept, been extrapolated across disciplines to demonstrate that we cannot detect or see most of a situation's or system's data. And funnily enough, we noticed through our conversations that there seems to be a similar trend or a similar approach to returnship programs when it comes to the iceberg principle, where all organizations touched upon some extremely important and relevant aspects when they were explaining their intent or their journey with returnship. Right? And some of those key aspects were talking about the importance of a diverse talent pool within their organization, right? Talking about the need to reduce talent attrition rates and returnship being the solution for that. Talking about the societal impact that they wanted to create for India, as well as talking about the intent behind branding yourself as an equal opportunity employer, right, from a cultural perspective as well. And so all of these are very, very relevant points, and returnship does touch upon all of these aspects. However, at the same time, there were certain crucial aspects that stayed under the water, or not top of mind for most organizations that we spoke to. Some of examples are what you see on the screen, right? They include the need to align returnship program designs to the requirements of business functions. That never really came up. And in fact, more than 95% of the organizations that we speak to end up being predominantly HR or talent acquisition leaders that are interested in this concept, but are yet to kind of extrapolate and get business buy-in or understand how that can impact the business side of things. Another example would be being able to secure leadership commitment, both from a budgetary standpoint as well as timelines. Another one would be investing the time to understand the needs of returnees in order to be able to set them up for success, and subsequently create an environment that's conducive to the returnee success above and beyond giving them the full-time offer in your organization. So on and so forth, other aspects of governance and accountability and being able to track returnship programs the same way you would any other business project or outcome kind of gets missed in conversation. And the last one is what we've tried to call the speed gap, which essentially talks about the expectations of success that a lot of organizations have when they plan to set up the returnship program for the first time. And a lot of that implies that they're hoping to look at 3 months, try to crunch the entire effort as quick as possible to try and use that as a pilot for success stories, and then eventually, of course, extrapolate. But the issue is it isn't something that can happen so easily. It isn't that one quick fix. And I think that ends up impacting the sustainability and the long-term success of that program. So it kind of makes us question whether the problem could be in the mindset with which we approach and hence design our returnship programs. And it makes us wonder if technically, if you start on the wrong foot, does that even help you, equip you to finish or even win the race? Right? Currently, the primary focus for returnship programs seems to be as a quick fix for diversity. I think it's amazing that a lot of organizations are talking about it now, and I think that's a significant win that we don't want to take away from. But at the same time, I think having that mindset definitely hampers the rest of the success of your program if you look at it from a long-term perspective. And the implications of this could be drastic, right? Our research shows that approximately 3 out of every 5 programs in India get discontinued after the pilot cohort, which is pretty shocking, especially if that became a business metric. I think there would be a lot of concern from an organizational standpoint, right? So I'm struggling to understand why that doesn't become a topic of conversation when we're looking at an HR initiative. And what we've seen is that this mindset potentially affects every subsequent element of returnship programs, from leadership commitment to operations to governance and accountability, success of the program and measuring those metrics, as well as to the continuity and longevity of the program. And in some of the examples, again, this is very subjective to organizations, but when it comes to commitment, a lot of the times that we have seen that leadership buy-in unfortunately ends up being relatively siloed and uncoordinated across HR and business teams, especially when you're hiring for tech roles and eventually those returnees get integrated into tech teams and tech functions. I think sometimes misalignment ends up naturally hampering progress or impact of the overall program. When it comes to operations, bandwidth constraints, especially if you aren't able to dedicate a specific team to look after your returnship programs, constantly prevail, and subsequent project escalations end up hampering the long-term impact of your program, especially if you're not able to meet those diversity targets. When it comes to governance, just one example is the lack of accountability and clear objective and key results, or OKRs, for your returnship program, like you would typically do for any other business team, definitely hampers ownership, definitely hampers long-term success. And lastly, when it comes to continuity, we've seen that returnship never ends up becoming a sustainable channel of hiring for the organization, probably because of this mindset or a couple of other reasons that end up stopping at that pilot cohort and not being able to make it a sustainable, integral part of your talent acquisition strategy. Again, there is no right answer in terms of how we can get it right. Most L&D models are similar. I think on-the-job training or on-the-job learning for organizations is probably the best way to understand what needs to work for your organization specifically. And hence, a lot of these answers only come up when you end up making the plan and kind of actioning on it from a returnship perspective. And that's why the importance of the pilot cohort and not rushing it becomes absolutely crucial. But that being said, there are a few thoughts that we'd like to see in your head, basis best-in-class practices we've understood, and I'm really excited to welcome the panelists to elaborate on this a little bit more in their discussion. But some of them would end up being, a couple of things, right? I'd like to kind of talk about them across the life cycle of a returnship program, so right from the intent to the process and also the outcome of returnship program. So at each of these stages, what are maybe some thoughts that you'd like to ask yourself when you're starting out your journey or when you're reevaluating your journey of returnship programs? Right, so the first and foremost would be the thought process behind investing in returnship programs. And that essentially means trying to understand your why for returnship beyond diversity hiring benefits. Right? Because diversity hiring is a great outcome, reducing talent attrition is a great outcome. But above and beyond that, what is the impact that you'd like your returnship program or your returnees to create in your organization once they enter the workforce? The second piece is around the processes themselves and the talent lifecycle extending well beyond talent acquisition. This goes back to creating that conducive environment for returnees. It's not just about giving them the opportunity to join the workforce, but it's also about ensuring that there's enough sensitization from managers, hiring managers, leaders, as well as their colleagues and peers once they do enter the workforce, in terms of how to be able to ensure that that environment is conducive to their success. Right? So in that case, it's more about asking your organization or your teams, once they've been hired and trained, what next? Are they really being set up for success? And what does that mean for your organization? And what kind of actions, conscious actions, can you take during the design phase of your returnship program to ensure that you're taking care of those sensitization elements and requirements? And lastly, when it comes to outcome, it's more about understanding the timelines and being wary of that speed gap when you are setting targets. Ask yourselves whether we're expecting too much from a 3 to 6 month pilot program and whether the outcome of that 3 to 6 month pilot program is enough to be able to influence how much you'd like to commit to returnship in the long term. with that kind of mindset, is it hampering long-term success or sustainability? And I'm not really sure how it would work, depending on timelines and business constraints. But what we have noticed is not looking at it from a narrow mindset and not expecting those immediate results to be reflective of the long-term success of your organization is one of the great ways to start. So that's essentially all I have today, and I did want to leave some of these thoughts for you. I want to thank you so much.